Have you ever had the feeling that something has fundamentally changed, even though not a single person has spoken a word out loud? That strange and heavy silence where everything looks completely identical on the outside, yet deep inside your soul, you know a powerful shift is taking place. What if, right at this very moment, someone who once hesitated, someone who kept their deepest emotions securely locked away, has finally reached the exact point where they can no longer pretend? What if the person whose heart has been fiercely resisting change has quietly made a firm decision that could alter both of your lives forever? The greatest turning points in our lives rarely begin with dramatic announcements or loud declarations. They begin in silence, tucked away in the hidden corners of the human mind, where raw fear and absolute truth face one another for the final time. There comes a profound moment when the painful comfort of staying exactly the same becomes far more agonizing than the terrifying uncertainty of moving forward. It's right inside that invisible moment that an ordinary person suddenly becomes extraordinary. Not because the outside world has transformed around them, but because they've transformed within. Today, we're going to explore the unseen psychological journey that leads a person to finally break free from fear, abandon old and tired emotional patterns, and choose a completely different future. Listen very carefully until the very end, because what you're about to hear may not only explain someone else's mysterious transformation, it may also reveal the silent changes that are already taking place deep within your own heart. There comes a distinct moment in every meaningful emotional connection when staying exactly the same becomes significantly more painful than changing. Most people mistakenly assume that relationships shift and evolve because of dramatic external events. But the deepest and most profound transformations almost always begin in complete and utter silence. They begin deep inside the heart, where emotions that have been ignored and suppressed for months or even years slowly gather enough strength to demand our attention. Emotional stagnation isn't simply the absence of physical movement or action. It's the quiet and exhausting repetition of the very same fears, the very same doubts, and the very same unspoken feelings day after day. It's living day after day with a persistent sense that something truly important remains unfinished and hanging in the balance. Your soulmate may have spent a long time convincing themselves that maintaining a safe distance, suppressing their raw emotions, or completely avoiding difficult conversations was the wisest and safest path to take. Yet the human spirit is simply too resilient and deep to endlessly deny what it truly and authentically feels. Eventually, the crushing weight of keeping things in absolute silence becomes much heavier than the underlying fear of change itself. The daily routines that once felt comforting start to feel restrictive, and the emotional walls that once offered sturdy protection begin to resemble a cold and lonely prison. This inner discomfort is frequently misunderstood by others because nothing appears visually different on the outside surface of their lives. They may continue to carry out their daily life, faithfully fulfill all their responsibilities, and smile in familiar social situations, while privately experiencing a growing and undeniable awareness that their current emotional reality no longer reflects who they're truly becoming. This is the very beginning of a true transformation. It's never caused by sudden excitement or some temporary passing emotion, but rather by the slow and steady realization that pretending to be fine no longer brings any inner peace. The human heart naturally seeks authenticity and truth, and when someone repeatedly ignores that deep inner calling, a profound restlessness begins to grow inside them. Small everyday moments suddenly become powerful and undeniable reminders. A familiar place visited by chance, an unexpected memory from the past, a meaningful dream in the dead of night, or even a quiet evening spent entirely alone can awaken emotions that have been buried deep beneath thick layers of personal pride and hesitation. These experiences are never signs of weakness or vulnerability gone wrong, but rather gentle invitations to greater self-awareness and healing. Instead of constantly searching for ways to escape their intense feelings, they finally begin asking why those exact feelings continue to return to them. That single, honest question marks the absolute end of emotional stagnation, because genuine curiosity completely replaces anxious avoidance. Rather than running away from their complex inner world, they slowly and bravely begin to explore every corner of it. They recognize that every single emotion carries an important message, and that every deep longing points directly towards something meaningful that has been neglected for far too long. The desperate desire to remain emotionally asleep begins to slowly fade away, replaced by a courageous willingness to finally face uncomfortable truths. They realize that life cannot be fully and truly lived while constantly holding back the most genuine and vulnerable parts of themselves. This profound awakening doesn't guarantee immediate outward action, nor does it promise that every single obstacle will miraculously disappear overnight. Instead, it creates a massive and powerful shift in their core perspective. What once seemed entirely impossible now suddenly appears necessary and within reach. What once felt deeply frightening now begins to feel surprisingly liberating. The greatest change of all is never found in external circumstances or shifting environments, but rather in the quiet, internal decision that continuing the old and tired pattern is simply no longer an option. In that defining moment, the heart completely stops asking how to desperately preserve a fading past and starts asking how to create a bright future that truly reflects honesty, raw courage, and deep emotional truth. Every single lasting transformation begins with this invisible and deeply personal decision, where the soul finally chooses growth over false comfort and authenticity over the endless, draining repetition of what no longer brings peace. Real change is almost never visible at the exact moment it first begins to take root. Most people naively expect transformation to announce itself loudly through dramatic conversations, sudden and rash decisions, or obvious actions that everyone can see. But the deepest and most enduring shifts happen long before anyone else around them can possibly recognize or understand them. They unfold quietly and steadily within the mind, where old beliefs are seriously questioned, hidden emotions finally rise to the surface of awareness, and long-held fears slowly and surely lose their heavy influence. Before your soulmate ever makes a single outward choice for everyone to see, they must first experience a profound inward awakening that completely changes the way they view themselves, their entire life, and the unique connection they share with you. This invisible process is almost always slow and deliberate, because genuine transformation can never be rushed or forced. It asks a person to look squarely at the parts of themselves they've actively ignored, fiercely denied, or carefully hidden away for years. Every single avoided feeling eventually stands up and asks to be truly understood. And every unanswered question continues to echo loudly in the chambers of the mind until it finally receives an honest and complete response. Throughout this quiet period, they may appear completely unchanged and ordinary to the outside world. Yet on the inside, everything is beginning to shift and move in a radically different direction. They replay old memories with a completely new and mature understanding, reflect on past decisions without feeling the desperate need to constantly justify them, and begin recognizing destructive patterns they once blindly believed were simply a fixed part of who they were. They realize with striking clarity that many of their past choices were shaped much more by paralyzing fear than by objective truth. and much more by self-protection than by genuine desire. This realization can be deeply uncomfortable because it requires accepting the hard truth that their greatest obstacle was never entirely outside of them all along. It was almost always the invisible and stubborn habits of self-doubt, misplaced pride, emotional avoidance, and the lingering fear of true vulnerability that quietly influenced every single important decision they made. As this new awareness steadily grows, their entire perspective begins to transform. Situations and challenges that once seemed completely impossible now appear entirely manageable, while the clever excuses that once felt so convincing begin to completely lose their power over them. Their internal dialogue slowly shifts away from asking, "What if everything goes completely wrong?" and moves directly toward asking, "What if I continue living a life that doesn't reflect my true and honest feelings?" That single profound shift changes everything, because it successfully redirects their attention away from imagined dangers and points it firmly toward authentic living. Instead of anxiously trying to control every possible future outcome, they begin the patient process of learning to trust the deep wisdom of their own heart. This does not mean that fear magically disappears overnight like a puff of smoke. Fear may very well still exist in the background, but it no longer gets to occupy the central driver's seat of their decisions. Quiet and steady courage steps in and takes its rightful place, not by completely eliminating uncertainty, but simply by making raw honesty far more important than temporary comfort. As this deep internal transformation continues to unfold day by day, they naturally become much more emotionally aware, more deeply reflective, and vastly more willing to acknowledge what they truly value in this life. Even ordinary everyday experiences begin carrying much greater meaning and weight because they are no longer blindly moving through their days on autopilot. They notice with clarity how certain thoughts repeatedly return to their mind, how particular memories still carry immense emotional weight, and how some special connections continue to profoundly influence them, regardless of the passage of time or physical distance. These thoughtful observations greatly deepen their understanding of themselves and gradually reshape their daily priorities from the ground up. What once felt like a terrifying and impossible emotional journey now reveals itself as a necessary and healing path, because remaining emotionally asleep is no longer satisfying or tenable. Every single step they take inward strengthens the solid foundation required for every meaningful step they will eventually take outward. When the inner world truly changes and heals, external actions naturally and effortlessly begin to follow suit. These actions do not manifest as forced reactions or desperate attempts, but rather as the pure, authentic expressions of a completely transformed mind and heart. The final decision that eventually becomes visible to others is truly nothing more than the final outward expression of countless silent moments of deep reflection, personal self-discovery, and profound emotional growth that have already reshaped the person entirely from within, long before anyone else even noticed the change happening. Fear has an extraordinary and deceptive ability to skillfully disguise itself as deep wisdom. It is a master at convincing people that passively waiting is the same as true patience, that staying completely silent is a sign of ultimate strength, and that avoiding all emotional risks is somehow the safest path to walk through life. For a very long time, your soulmate may have completely believed these quiet and comforting deceptions. They may have repeatedly told themselves that keeping their intense feelings tightly hidden away would somehow magically protect them from inevitable disappointment, painful rejection, or a shattered heart. On the surface level, this defensive approach can easily seem completely reasonable because it promises a temporary illusion of security and control. Yet,
The longer a person allows fear to dictate and guide their choices, the smaller and more suffocating their emotional world inevitably becomes. Instead of living their life with open-hearted courage, they slowly transition into living with constant, exhausting caution. Every single opportunity for a deeper and more meaningful connection is constantly measured against the terrifying possibility of future pain.
And gradually, the act of protecting themselves becomes far more important than actually experiencing genuine, uninhibited love. Without even realizing it happening, they slowly construct invisible walls all around their heart that not only successfully keep hurt away, but unfortunately also prevent joy, deep trust, and true intimacy from ever entering. Over time, those protective walls become utterly exhausting to maintain and uphold. A heart that genuinely longs to be understood and embraced cannot remain hidden away forever in the shadows. It continues to whisper softly beneath every single daily distraction, gently reminding the person that there is a massive difference between merely surviving emotionally and truly living a full life. This is precisely where a profound and unsettling inner conflict begins to take shape. One part of them desperately wants to remain within the comfortable safety of old and familiar habits, while another part grows increasingly restless, longing for true authenticity instead of defensive protection. The more they try to ignore this persistent inner voice, the louder and clearer it becomes. They begin noticing that fear has not brought them the peace they once hoped for. Instead, it has left them with a collection of unanswered questions, lingering regrets, and the uncomfortable realization that avoiding emotional risks has also meant avoiding all of life's most meaningful possibilities. Every single memory of a missed opportunity becomes a quiet and effective teacher. Every moment of past hesitation reminds them that some precious chances in this life cannot be repeated forever. Gradually, they begin to understand that fear does not always show up as sudden panic or overwhelming anxiety. Sometimes it appears as endless overthinking, waiting around forever for the absolute perfect moment, searching for complete certainty where none exists, or convincing themselves that tomorrow will somehow magically be easier than today. Yet tomorrow rarely removes fear from the equation. In fact, it often strengthens fear by turning simple hesitation into a deeply ingrained habit. This crucial realization fundamentally changes the way they view their own emotions. Instead of constantly asking how to eliminate fear completely from their lives, they begin asking whether fear truly deserves to control the overall direction of their existence. That single powerful question marks the true birth of courage. Courage is so often misunderstood as the mere absence of fear, but true courage actually exists right alongside uncertainty. It is the quiet, deliberate decision to move toward what feels genuinely meaningful, despite not knowing exactly how everything will eventually unfold. And your soulmate begins recognizing the vital truth that every worthwhile relationship requires deep vulnerability. And vulnerability can never exist without the inherent possibility of being hurt. Rather than seeing this possibility as a valid reason to retreat into their shell, they start viewing it as clear evidence that what they feel is real and alive. The human heart cannot experience deep, transformative love while remaining completely shielded and protected. Genuine connection asks for radical honesty, emotional openness, and the willingness to be truly seen by another without hiding behind a mask of pride or emotional distance. As this understanding steadily grows within them, they stop measuring their life by the mistakes they might potentially make, and begin measuring it by the rich opportunities they might forever lose if they never take a chance and act. Love gradually becomes far more valuable than comfort, and personal truth becomes much stronger than fear itself. Through that quiet but entirely life-changing shift in perspective, they no longer allow fear to define and dictate their future. Instead, they choose to let hope, authenticity, and emotional honesty guide the path ahead, knowing full well that a life shaped by courage is always infinitely richer than one shaped by endless hesitation. While so much of our attention is frequently placed on the profound changes happening within your soulmate, it is very easy to overlook the equally quiet transformation taking place within your own heart. Personal growth does not always arrive with dramatic breakthroughs or obvious life milestones. More often than not, it unfolds slowly through ordinary, everyday moments that might seem completely insignificant at the time. Every single challenge you have faced, every disappointment that tested your inner patience, and every difficult period of uncertainty has been quietly shaping your inner world in ways you may not immediately recognize or appreciate. Although these challenging experiences may have felt painful or confusing when you were going through them, they have slowly encouraged you to become significantly stronger, wiser, and vastly more emotionally aware. The person you are today is simply not the same person you were months or even years ago. Even if you sometimes struggle to clearly see that difference in the mirror, real growth often happens so gradually and silently that it feels completely invisible while it is actively taking place. It is only when you take a moment to look back over your shoulder that you truly notice how your perspective has shifted, how your emotional reactions have become calmer and more grounded, and how your understanding of yourself has grown much deeper. There may well have been a time in your past when you sought constant reassurance from others or firmly believed your personal happiness depended entirely on someone else's choices and actions. As life naturally presented you with difficult lessons, however, you began discovering the vital truth that genuine peace can never be built on shaky uncertainty or the fleeting approval of another person.